Good morning, thanks for joining us today. My name is Alicia Bolton, this is Lyndsay Knowles, and we are from Georgetown Technical College, which is in the Myrtle Beach area in South Carolina. So it was interesting driving here in the snow because that's not something that happens very often. So that was a fun experience, being up here in the mountains. One of the things that we continue to find challenging, especially in English 101 and in general, is having students analyze. Even if they can do it, they seem to go, I don't understand why. Like, why am I analyzing this? Why am I breaking down this short story for literature? Why am I analyzing this ad? I've done rhetorical analyses, find the logos, ethos, and pathos, and they're like, okay, here they are. I don't understand why I did that, but here's the paper, and things like that. So what we have tried to do is find ways to bring the real world application of why they're analyzing into our assignments. And the way we have done that with this one is have them look at gender stereotypes through the popular media, advertisements, TV shows, things like that, so that they see not only why they're analyzing and what they can recognize, but why that matters to them in the grand scheme of things. Like, why do you need to be able to say, the subtext of this ad is this? Like, why does that matter? How does it influence you? And that is what this assignment aims to do. So we'd like to share that with you today, talk about what we have done so far.
So we work with English 101 students for this particular assignment, and we're looking at it from the approach of the students need to be able to analyze, particularly when they get to 102 and they're going to be doing that with written text. And so we looked at how, when I first started teaching at Georgetown, Alicia was my mentor, and we worked together, and she shared this assignment that she did with her students, where she showed them a video about gender stereotypes by an expert in that field. And then she had her students apply those ideas from that video to a visual text, specifically to ads. And I was very interested in that idea. So, but I was also interested in applying male stereotypes so that we could look at how the media influences our perception of being a female in our society as well as being a male in our society. And so I incorporated male stereotypes into the assignment, made some changes, and then we've been working on it together ever since. So at the heart of this unit is this idea, this question is, what does the media communicate to us about what it means to be a woman or a man in our culture? So we look at ads, we look at clips from popular television shows, we look at clips from films. We have the students watch the videos, we stop at different spots throughout the video, and we talk about the different stereotypes that these experts are discussing. And then we have them apply these ideas to text in the classroom, and then they eventually do that independently. So we start with reading skills, because when we talk about visual text, the students, a lot of times I'll say, let's read this text, and they look at me like, what are you talking about? How are we going to read images? So we talk about how text does not have to be a print text, how text is anything that requires you to create meaning. And we look at ads, we talk about how you have to look at the images, you have to look at the print, you have to look at the color, the setting, the background, and look at all those elements, bring them together and figure out what they're saying. Not just literally what they're saying. Obviously the students were like, they're selling me a product, so we say, let's go beyond that. And what is this particular text telling me about what it means to be a man or a woman in the culture? So what we first do is identify the elements that create the meaning of the text. Since we're going beyond just words on a page, what exactly do they have to look at to create that meaning? Then we interpret the underlying meaning or message of each one of those elements. Then we evaluate how the images and the print text or dialogue work together. So we talk about print text with ads and commercials, and then we talk about dialogue with films and television shows. Okay, so in order to get my students to break down these different elements, I created a handout to sort of guide them through this process. So if we look at magazine ads, I tell them to pay attention to background, setting, any objects that are in the ad, figures, body type and size, age, features, figure behavior, so what is their position, where is it on the page, and how exactly is the person's body positioned, body language, eye contact, facial expression, colors, layout, text or print, and then symbols or logos. If we're looking at a commercial, a television show, or a film, we look at setting, props, movement, we look at camera angles, even and talk about what those camera angles can mean and how that can actually create meaning for the viewer, body movement, body language, dialogue, costume, so on and so forth. So first we begin by just identifying these elements, because when a student looks at a visual text, they're not necessarily thinking, oh, here's the setting, it's important, or here's the costume and it's important. So we have them note those particular elements, and they describe it. And then we work on the analysis. We say, okay, we've talked about these stereotypes now. Is the costume communicating anything? Is the setting communicating anything? And we work with these, with this handout in class and read different texts. So we read an example ad. I actually pull in a clip from Twilight and from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and we talk about the difference between those two. We talk about the dark alley, how in Twilight it means danger, and how in Buffy the Vampire Slayer it's actually a tool for her. She uses it to trap her, the people who are following her. So we talk about the difference in setting, and the students practice reading those texts in class as a whole group, in small groups, and then as a whole group. So.
Right. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jean Kilbourne's work that she has done. She is a feminist who's part of the feminist movement. She has been making this film and remaking this film for over 30 years. And what I realized when it came to analyzing was that the first thing I needed to give students was the context in which they needed to view the ad. I work mainly with advertisements in my assignment. And they're just generally not at that point where they can make those connections and see the things for themselves. So I want to give them a context and say, these are the things I want you to look for. Like, find things that support this. It really helps them, get to that point where they can analyze it sort of more on their own. Jean Kilbourne has been remaking this for over 30 years. I was first introduced to her series of films in graduate school, and had used it for a variety of things. The full film, Killing of Sauce and 4, is about 45 minutes, so we watched the entire thing in class. I put together a short little couple-minute clip here so you can see what the context is that she provides for some of these advertisements, and then we'll look at some examples with you in class.
What are the products? They sell values, they sell images, they sell concepts of love, sexuality, of success, and perhaps most important, of normalcy. To a great extent, they tell us who we are and who we should be. So these were just some of the ads that I noticed and saw out there, and I cut them out, put them on my refrigerator, and eventually I had a kind of collage of ads. And I started to see a pattern, a kind of statement about what it meant to be a woman in the culture. We all grow up in a culture in which women's bodies are constantly turned into things, into objects. Here she's become the model of the club. In this ad, she becomes part of a video game. And this is everywhere, in all kinds of advertising. Women's bodies turn into things, into objects. The basic message to girls is the one in this ad. The top that says, the more you subtract, the more you add. What a horrible message. Now, this is a fashion ad. They're talking about simplicity and fashion. And she's also incredibly thin. And look at her body language. She looks as if she's trying to disappear. Women of color are generally considered beautiful only if they approximate the white ideal. If they are light-skinned, have straight hair, Caucasian features, even Beyonce had her skin like this. But how often do we see an image like this? Black women are often featured in jungle settings wearing leopard skins as if they were exotic animals. In recent years, media has become a moral issue for women. Women have been made to feel ashamed of eating, ashamed of having an appetite. And language that used to describe sexual activity now describes eating. Respect yourself in the morning. It used to be that respecting yourself in the morning and having sexual activity, not what you're going to eat. But that's all turned around. Cutting girls down to size also means silence. And girls are often pictured in ads between 18 magazines with their hands over their throats or their mouths covered in one way or another, or with copy like this, score high on non-verbal skills. You're looking at my feminine side, and he's of course referring to the girl but what the ad is saying to young men, this is a cigarette ad saying to teenagers to young men, it's saying to them, you better not have a feminine side. There better not be anything about you that could be at least considered.
So that's just a short clip, and she goes through a lot of other examples like that. And so what I have students do is take notes on this, and I say, what messages do ads send about women? And so they write down things like that, like, oh, women of color should approximate the white ideal. Women are often silenced in ads. That's the context I want them to view these ads in. My favorite one is that one about the more you subtract, the more you add, because she says, obviously it's talking about fashion, but what it's also saying, and that's what we spend a lot of time talking about, I don't want the intended message. I want the unintended, the subconscious, the subtext of the message. So this gives them those visuals, those points to look for. Now we look for ads that have these in them. And what I do is I usually have them bring magazines to class. It's like a homework assignment. Like just bring a magazine of any kind. I don't care what it is, just bring it into class. And after we watch this, I say, okay, now it's your turn, all right? We look at some together, we'll do that next. But before they even know what they're doing, they bring those in, and then they are responsible for finding these ads on their own. What I like about the magazines in class is there's no Googling. They can't just, get on their computers and say, messages, ads sent about women. Oh, look, here they all are, right? We do it in class, so at least in that context, it forces them to find them for themselves. But after we watch it, we do look at a couple together because I want to guide them to that. So today you get to play, my students, okay? We just pretend you watch the whole thing here. And so we look at an ad like this one from Aussie. And I do start with the intended message because we talk about that when we talk about arguments and like why it sells this product. So I say, okay, why should women buy this Aussie product? What's the message here? You wear it. Your hair will look just like this on the beach every time you go, right? That's what this product does for you. You say, okay, that's fine. That's fair. But now we're going to look at what else it might be saying. And I start by saying, what does it usually mean if you have a dry spell? Someone please say it. I don't want to be. Is it usually? Yes. Right? Is it usually some guys like, you hadn't been laid in a while? Like, that's absolutely right. And everyone laughs and and I'm like, no, but that's true though. So then, if we take that, what is it saying about this product? End your dry spell with a miracle. What will this product do for you? It will get you laid. And that same guy usually says that too. I'm like, you're absolutely right. I start with this one on purpose, by the way, because they giggle, get it all out up front. We're going to talk about these, so you might as well just sort of laugh and see the messages that are sent here. Then we talk about some other things with this one. Most students notice that even though she's wearing a bikini, because she's at the beach, and she has on a bathing suit, it's covered by that purple bar at the bottom. So it's meant to, for her to appear as if she's nude. So they recognize these sorts of things. The perspective, how close she is to the camera, all that matters is what she looks like, her face, nothing else is sort of relevant here. And so then we go to another one. All right, which one of Kilborn's points does this one support?
African American women in the jungle.
Portrayed, right, like jungles, like animals. And this is a key moment for me because most students are quick to say, oh, she's like an animal. And I say, but why do you say that? And now you have to point out the elements. So what contributes to this idea that she's like animal-like?
Naked.
She's naked, she's crouched.
The setting.
She's in the woods, right? Her hair, students will mention her hair is like kind of wild, it looks in that way. So this is the point where I start to say, okay, you see the message that's being sent. Now you have to tell me why. You have to pick apart the specific elements that are saying this contributes to the subtext of this message. And Mike, I have an answer for you about this ad, because I looked it up for you. This is actually an ad from the World Wildlife Foundation, but it was created by their partner in Brazil, their Brazilian company, sister company. And it was a series of them that was eventually pulled because the WWF was like, whoa, wait, what is this going on here? But it was originally an ad for them. So
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So it was okay in Brazil,
same that
but
way.
Americans were not comfortable with it.
Yes, the same that way.
Interesting.
They created it because they had a sister company, I suppose. So, because and this is interesting too, because a lot of students will notice that and say, WWF, was that really an ad by them? So I had to find that context behind it. But yes, someone in Brazil created it, and eventually it got pulled. So, and then finally, there's one more we'll look at briefly here. I say, which point does this support? First, silence, right? She's covered by this. And this is a point where I try to push him to go a little bit further. I say, okay, we're making those connections. But what else do you notice? Like, how is she dressed and what might that suggest?
Prisoner.
Prison, that's what most of you say. Like, it's like a prison wear. She's got the black and white stripes on. In this one, we talk a lot about her. Like, she's looking up. What might that mean if she's looking up?
She's subordinate.
She's subordinate, right? She's subordinate. And some students will say, I think it means that she's like dumb, like she's ditzy, she doesn't have anything going on, she's just kind of staring. And I say both of those are great interpretations. You can take it either way here. And we talk about some other elements going past just what Kilborn discusses and adding to this, what elements specifically make up, the context of this ad. And then they break into their groups and look at the magazines together, and we sort of do some discussion, about that. So. Now, the thing with Kilborn, and I only use her because I do my assignment much early. It's like the first assignment of the semester, so I sort of keep it a little more limited. Unfortunately, she doesn't touch much on male stereotypes. It focuses mainly on women. And she talks a couple, like the feminine side at the end, she does mention that. But Lyndsay has been able to sort of counteract this oversight with a second film that she brings in to discuss those. So,
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about Jackson Katz today. I do have a preview for his film. It's called Tough Guys 2. But he is a cultural theorist and educator, and he works a lot talking about our concepts of masculinity. And he says that the main link with masculinity is to violence in our culture. And so we see these repeated images over and over again where masculinity equals violence. And he has specific ideas that he brings up throughout his talk, but it's really interesting because he moves beyond just advertisements and he brings in, he actually brings in news broadcasts. He does look at subversions, he talks about video games, he looks at film, he mentions television shows. And so we have a really wide variety of different texts besides just the magazine end, so it's nice for them to see the difference between the two discussions. But a few of his ideas that he brings up specifically, and this is a video that's done through Media Education Foundation for Media Literacy. He talks about the tough guys, and what he means by that is that we have this sort of front that is expected of males in our culture. And he said not all males are like this, but it's the one that we see through the media, and he brings up what he calls gender cops, how a lot of people in our society feel the need to police gender, and if you're not acting according to your gender, you're stepping out of line and need to be put back in line. But the tough guys has different elements to it. One is to not be too intellectual. The other one is to not show emotion except for anger. The third one is to be sexually aggressive, and then also to not back down. So if you're childish, you can't back down. He also brings in something called the cool pose, and the video goes over it, but I'm afraid you won't be able to hear it. So I'm just going to talk to you about it a little bit. But he talks about this cool pose that originated in gangster films like Scarface and Godfather. And he talks about how poor black urban males adopted this pose. And he actually has clips of different males, and specifically celebrities, talking about these two films and how they were sort of these pivotal films for them when they watched them. They would watch Scarface over and over and over again. So it's this pose that's adopted that originally came from The Godfather and Scarface. Then it became adopted by Hispanic men. Then it was adopted by Asian men. Then it was adopted by white males. And then it came full circle, and it all started with these two pivotal films, as well as other gangster films as well. So it's some really interesting ideas. He also talks about the defense of masculinity, right? That need to, if you are challenged of your masculinity, the need to step up and fight back. So I'll show you this just because there are some clips. You'll be able to see some of the types of text that he brings in, types of visual text. Even if you can't hear it, you'll be able to see some of the clips that he shows. before, I do give my students a warning because there are some pretty violent images in this, and so I tell them repeatedly, you know, if they're very violent images, and I put a link on D2L, our learning management system, and say if you want to, you know, take a sneak peek before class and see if it's something you're uncomfortable with, and if you're not, then come talk to me and we'll work out in it, you know, a different assignment. So I do like to give them a heads up because there is profanity in it, but it's not profanity just for the sake of profanity. He's using it as evidence. And one of the other things I like about both Katz and Kilborn is that this leads really nicely into argument, because what they're essentially doing is building an argument, and they actually quote sociologists and psychologists, and they bring in their examples from the real world. And so we talk about how, you know, this is an argument, you might not necessarily agree with it, but they're building it with statistics, they're building it with evidence, and we're going to use the ideas, even whether you agree with them or not, we're going to use these ideas to look at in context. So what we do from there is we look at some examples in class. I show clips, I mostly focus on clips since we focus on magazine ads with the female stereotypes. But the first show I talk about is Supernatural. Anybody watch Supernatural, at least heard of it? It's a show that's still on the air. It actually originally aired on the WB, so it's a show for teenagers. It's been on for almost 11 years now. But this show is interesting because we talk about how text can both reinforce these stereotypes and also break away from them. Because text can do some really interesting things and actually going against the stereotypes that we see. So this show actually does both. It reinforces these ideas of violence. It's about two brothers, and they fight demons. It's obviously called Supernatural, so it's about supernatural elements. So there's a lot of violence through when they're fighting with demons. They even fight with each other. There's always the blood splatter at the beginning. There's those telltale signs of that violent masculinity. And so we watch a clip where we see that violence, but the brothers have a really close relationship with each other, and they're often affectionate with each other. They hug each other. They tell each other how they feel. And so we see, within that clip that I show, we see violence, but we also show them, you know, breaking away from that tough guys and being emotional with each other. So I'll bring up the next picture. So again, we see that violence. But here we have, you know, moments where either male cries, you know, has these moments where they're really struggling with the violence that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And Katz talks about this too. He's not demonizing males. What he's saying is that this has a really negative impact, not just on the people around them, but on males themselves. And he talks about covert depression and how they really struggle with, you know, issues that they can't talk about. We talk about how, you know, when it comes to depression, women are much more likely to seek help than males are, and how it's connected to these ideas that he's talking about. So, all right, this next clip is from Breaking Bad. Anybody familiar with Breaking Bad? Yes, okay, so Breaking Bad fans. For those of you not familiar with it, at the beginning of the show, Walter White is a science teacher, and he finds out he has terminal cancer. Now, he's decidedly not as masculine as the males that he ends up becoming involved with, but when he finds out he's dying, he teams up with a former student and starts making meth. And he wants to put money away for his family, to take care of his family when they're gone. And he has a lot of you know, issues with morals when it comes to that. You know, he's not comfortable doing that. He's afraid of getting in trouble. But his whole motive is to take care of his family when he's gone. But we see Walt begin to change as the show progresses, and he starts to take on these more violent tendencies. And those of you who watch this really I know what you're talking about. In this particular clip, this is a monologue, and I wish that we had volume because it's so good. But he's talking to his wife Skylar in this clip, and she's telling him that she thinks that they should just go to the police, and he becomes very defensive with her. So you can't hear the dialogue, but again, I'm going to play it so you can see his body language. At first, he's listening to her, but then she challenges his masculinity, and he becomes very angry with her. So I'll just show that so you can see the body language. starts talking to her, he basically says, I'm not in danger, I am the danger. And he says, I am the one who knocks. And with that, with his dialogue. So when we discuss this clip, I say, what stereotypes do you see? And they say the tough guys, and then the defensive masculinity. And I say, okay, how do we see that in this clip? What are you seeing on screen that's helping you see that?
Did any of the students pick up on how his voice also changes?
Yes. We talk about inflection, we talk about tone, and I try to get them, because we're working on descriptive writing at the same time, so I say, okay, how would you describe that tone? You can't just say his tone changes. Okay, well, how does it change? Yes, that's a great question.
Do you remember which episode it was?
I can't remember, but
Like third season or something.
I think it's from season 3. If you email me my email address, I will find out and email you that was the title.
I was also wondering if you had come back.
I'd be happy to email that as well. And I have actually some descriptive paragraphs that I put on the back so they can see what a description of a video text would look like. So I have that as well. I'd be happy to share any material.
You notice he took his shirt off?
Yes.
And he has on a t-shirt,
Yes.
like a Marlon Brando sort of thing.
Right. And at that point I'll say, okay, why did he do that? What was the purpose? What was he showing? What do you think?
His real self.
His real
But
self.
I guess, I
Right.
know that's sort of problematic for you to do, but.
Right. And some students say it's a sweater, so he's kind of
Yeah.
getting rid of the clothing that's not quite as viewed as masculine. He's taking that off. What else does he do that shows that tough guys and that defensive masculinity?
He comes very close to her and
Looks down. We talk about camera angle, it's a low angle. We talk about, you always use superhero films as an example, because in a lot of superhero films you'll see that low angle being used so that the characters look more powerful because the camera is looking up at them, so it makes them look bigger and stronger, and we see that low angle here. So students will often note the camera angle and what it's doing. And we say the same thing if it's a bird's eye view, a lot of times it makes the person in the frame look weaker because you're looking down on that person rather than looking up. So, good. Anything else? Yes. We talk about the hand gestures. What do you think those hand gestures indicate?
Implied violence, perhaps.
Yes. That potential violence, yes. Which is then backed up by the dialogue, right? I am dangerous, and yet you can see it brewing just beneath the surface. Anything else that you noticed?
Anti-reason. I mean, there's something anti-intellectual about his whole response.
Right.
That she's reasoning, he's anti-reason, he's shutting her down. There's no further discussion or analysis.
Right. Excellent point. Yes. Because she's being very reasonable. She's like, let's cut this off before it gets too far. And he's saying, no, I'm strong, I'm powerful. You don't understand how powerful I am. That's a great point. We talk about how he stands up when he's ready to assert himself. And he doesn't start speaking until he turns around and he's walking towards her. So, we bring in all these different elements. We also talk about the setting, because the setting's really interesting. Why is the setting important in this particular book?
It's their bedroom. And that usually can imply a lot of other things
Right.
that are more like your,
Right. So we have the setting of intimacy, and a setting that is more feminine, right? So we have her, trying to impose her opinion on him in the setting that's intimate, decidedly more feminine, and he is reacting to that. So we talk about how that violence coming out in the bedroom is very different, from what we would usually see.
So what's that, a 30-second clip? One of my all-time favorite 30 seconds of television, no question. However, I was wondering, in the larger context of the show,
Yes.
I mean, Walt is never the one who knocks. He's always the one playing defense and getting beat up. He's always got a black eye or something across his
Right.
nose. He's not the one who knocks.
Right.
But he's performing that for Skylar. I wondered if you could touch that, like the larger context of Walt
Yes.
in the classroom.
Yeah, that's a great point. When we're working with it in small groups, not so much. This is more of like, here's an example, it's very evident. But if a student chooses to write about a television show, I say when they're establishing context in the introduction, they need to know that show really well. They can't just pick a random episode and write about it. They need to have a really good understanding of the characters, a solid understanding of the plot, be able to communicate that and say, within the context of this entire show, this is how this book is relevant, and this is what it's revealing about a character or a situation. And I tell them, pick an episode or two, pick one or two scenes to work with. Don't try to work with an entire episode, because we just had that whole discussion on the 30-second clip. So that's a great point, though.
I don't want to, if you guys are, I don't want to hijack.
No, go ahead.
Another you're showing, in this case, Knowles, I'll say growth, but change, metamorphosis from, weak, definitely not stereotypical male,
Right.
more stereotypical. The show NYPD Blue, which is old, they take Sipowicz, if anybody watched that show, I don't know if you're familiar with that show, it went from stereotypical male to unstereotypical male. Do you ever do that, where you're showing how stereotypes break down over time with characters?
Yes. And one of the other stereotypes I bring in is the helpless female. And that's how we talk about, we show how Twilight, Bella is the epitome of the helpless female. We show a stalking scene, and then we look at Buffy, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and show how she is not the helpless female. She actually plays on.
I was just saying within one character.
Yeah, with the main, and I've had characters do that before. Like I've had a student work with House of Cards who said this character reinforces the stereotypes, and this character actually goes against the stereotypes, and picked out two different scenes, and showed how the show is both reinforcing and breaking away from the stereotypes with two different characters.
I was just talking about one character
Changing. I don't think I've had anybody do that yet. But the other interesting thing about Wall is that he's not anti-intellectual. I mean, he's brilliant. So, and he's using that. He's using his intellect to actually, establish his power. So there's that as well, which would be an interesting point to.
Which ultimately backfires because she's not impressed. She's
Right.
right. And that could go back to that analysis of what is this really doing to a man? Which
Right.
makes it tough when he's not.
Right, exactly. And what is it doing to his relationship with his wife?
So what do? They turn these clips that they find in with their essays so you can watch them before you grade their essays and stuff?
Yep, a lot of times I'll say, please give me a YouTube video, but they actually describe the scene in detail because we bring in descriptive writing, and Alicia's actually getting ready to talk about writing. So they describe the scene in detail before they analyze it, so that we talked about how you're using analysis here in terms of writing skills, but you also have to, you're working with a text where you can't bring in textual evidence. You have to be able to describe it in such detail that I can understand.
So they don't necessarily show you them? So.
No, I request that they do, and with magazine ads, I say, please include your magazine ads so I can look at it, so I can make sure the description is accurate.
Right.
And a lot of times, a lot of the shows that they talk about, I'm familiar with, and I can
So
watch
you
the
can,
clips.
on YouTube, if there's a whole episode, you can take just a little bit of it.
Sometimes they'll actually find the clip on YouTube. Like they'll have an episode in mind and they'll look for a specific clip. Like I use Friends clips all the time, and a lot of times I can find the clip that I want. Somebody at some point has downloaded it. So a lot of times I'll say, if you have a link, I'd love to see it so that way I can watch it and make sure that it's accurate. So.
Yeah, and obviously, guys, this is a pretty long unit, as you can imagine. I made a terrible mistake this semester, I will admit it, of trying to cut it down to like 2.5 weeks. I'm like, we got other stuff we need to move on to. I will not do that again. This is like a month at least of going through and doing examples in class and letting them practice and do more examples in class, because they need a lot of that reinforcement. Like, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. And I'm constantly going, how do we see that? Like, okay, so he's angry, or he distributes that, or he epitomizes that angry, violent masculinity. How? And sometimes it can be really hard to get them to say, because he shakes his fist or he poses this way. So there's a lot of practice that goes on with that, doing it. And so we'll talk briefly about the writing skills that are reinforced through the assignments, and then we'll each go over the assignments that we do, so you can sort of see what we tell the students. Here is what it is that we want you to write for us. Because we start with watching this in class, and there's a lot of discussion, and then we sort of have them independently write an essay that finds these stereotypes in the media. So developing a thesis statement, what we like about this assignment is that one of the things we talk about a lot is that writing is a response to someone else. It's a conversation, and it's not just this isolated essay that you write. So they're in a way responding to Kilborn Cats and these media clips or ads or whatever that they find. That's really helpful to get them ready to do that response, sort of in a different way. Integrating evidence, they have, again, Kilborn Cats and the visual text they use, so they're having to, and we haven't even really gone over like research yet, but they have to figure out how to put those all together in this one essay assignment. Description we talked about, we spend a lot of time on that in class. I have my students describe their ad that they're going to use. They bring in a description, or they do it in class, either way. Then I have them swap with a classmate, and they have to draw the picture of what's described on the page. And it doesn't take long until they're like, oh, I messed up, I didn't know this was coming, you know. And they realize that blue doesn't really mean anything, like blue, light blue, navy blue, you know, what color. There were 3 women, were they on the left side, the right side, you know, like where were they standing, perspective, all these things. So they start to sort of see those complexities with the language there. Of course, the underlying messages and specifically the elements that they find in them. And then reflecting on why it matters. And what we both tell our students, I believe now, is your sort of opinion has to come in the conclusion paragraph. I have gotten some, you know, sort of rants before that's like, I can't believe that the ads do this to women, this is terrible, and, you know, causes all these problems. That's true, but we talk about you have to be able to analyze objectively and leave your opinion out of it until maybe the end of your essay when you can make a sentence or two about what this means for us. And then, of course, they are citing their sources. I stick with magazines and the film of Kilborn's, which means they have to learn how to build their citations, and we do them together in class. Okay, where do you find the title of the magazine, the volume number, right, all of this. There's no database to generate the citation for them, so I really like that they are sort of forced to see how it works together, you know, before we get into the detailed research. So, here's my assignment, and we'll be happy to send you guys the Prezi so you can see all this much better. So just let us know. We've got our email addresses at the end here. But I tell my students they have to locate one advertisement. I stick with just ads. They have to be from a printed magazine because this is like my first essay assignment. Lyndsay does her second, I think a little later in the semester. And that's a nice thing. You can tailor this with extra research if you want them to go into more detail. They can do that. I stick with like find an ad, and that's what we're going to work on. But I do give them options. If they can find one ad, but it has to support 2 to 3 different points that Kilborn mentions. Or they can find 2 to 3 ads and focus on one point. And we sort of talk about, we've discussed fallacies a little bit, so we talk about like hasty generalization. And like if you just say this one supports this one point, that's not much of an argument. It's not much of a detailed analysis there. So you need to have more evidence than that. So they can do 1 to 2 to 3 points or 2 to 3 and sort of 1 point. I let them do that. Of course, I tell them they can't use any of the ads from the speech or the film because I tell them we want to add to her collection on her refrigerator. So find more that she can put up on her refrigerator and, you know, collect here to see these examples. I don't let them quote. What I usually do is I have a sort of list of some of the points, the main points from Kilborn's speech, and they're quoted directly. It's like word for word. And I say, this is what you're looking for, but you have to reword this. You can't use it the way that it's presented here. So it's sort of like a mini transcript in a way, but it gets them to practice summarizing and paraphrasing before we move into quoting. So I want to see that difference there, and we'll spend some time talking about that. So, any questions about the general topic there, and then I'll to go over hers.
A really similar assignment, so they can select a magazine, ad, commercial, television show, or film. They have to read the visual text, look for one or more of the gender stereotypes that Kilborn or Katz discusses. Some of them actually do both. You know, they say we see stereotypes from Kilborn and stereotypes from Katz. They have to write the description of the visual text. They have to analyze it, reflect on significance. And I do use this as a way to segue into quote integration. We use TYCA-SE at Georgetown Tech, and so I have them start practicing templates to integrate quotes directly from sources. Before we get to research, it's a nice way for them to practice and put together a worksite page so I can give them some feedback before they've got that gigantic research paper. So it's sort of low stakes opportunity for me to give them feedback on MLA in terms of citing sources. But they can argue that, like I said before, they can argue that a text reinforces stereotypes. They can argue that a text breaks away from stereotypes, or they can say they're both. They just have to indicate that clearly in their thesis statement. So we're going to share some success stories with you.
Just some examples of what we've gotten from students. The good ones, of course, here. They're not all good. We try. It's not as, you know, you still have some problems. But this was one of my students who did the 3 ads that support one point. I also like with the thesis statement structure, by the way, that we're sort of breaking away from that blank because X, Y, and Z structure. And they're learning that the points or the reasons in their thesis statement are either the ads or the points you're going to discuss depending on which option you chose. So they sort of have to think about the structure a little bit differently. But this student said these recent advertisements from Sexy Hair, MAC, and Chanel all back up to Gene Kilborn's claim that advertisements are increasingly too sexual, often to the point of being pornographic. And she went through and discussed the poses and the body language and like the irrelevance to the product that's being sold. It's like, why are they, you know, naked and sexualized for this hair product or whatever. And then I had one student find this one, which was actually a local ad in Myrtle Beach. It was really interesting to find, and he found it in a local magazine. And he did the one ad and said the points that he found was that the ideal female beauty is that we all have to look a certain way, and that you have to be young to be sexy. Basically, that's another point that she makes there. So, and I do usually have them submit the ads with their essay. You know, I tell them, like, you know, these days you have phones, take a picture, put it in, you know, you all know how to do this these days. So, and if they want to turn it in physically, I'll let them, you know, they can do that too. Like, either way, if they want to tear it out. And then this one was really interesting. This was actually within an essay, but a student noticed that not only is the African American model here, not only is she that typical light-skinned beauty that they talked about, but she talked about the dominance because she's in the back and she's hidden, and the other two white women are sort of more dominant. I thought that was a really interesting observation that went a little beyond what Kilborn discusses, but it's still in this context that we were discussing with the stereotypes there.
This is a student who worked with The Walking Dead. So he said, in The Walking Dead, the tough guy is reinforcing the character of Rick in his aggressive role as protector of the survivors. And he actually he used the scene when Rick is protecting his son, and he actually bites off the guy's ear. Bites the guy's
Don't
neck.
tell me.
Bites the guy's
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. But anyway, he pulled in that scene, he described it in detail, and then used that to analyze Rick. So. This student went through two different ads. One NIBIA ad reinforces the stereotype of ideal female beauty through a model who's thin and flawless, while a Dove ad breaks the stereotype of an average-sized model that's realistic and perfection. So had analysis on both sides there, which is really interesting. And then there's also a Kleenex commercial called Time for a Change, and the student was arguing that this commercial breaks the tough guys through a young boy who demonstrates compassion and a different understanding of what it means to be a boy. So you can see the younger boy talking to the little girl in the commercial, and so analyze that commercial in depth.
That's pretty much it. I know we're sort of at, at our time here. Our email addresses are here, and we'll be happy to send you any of our materials, things like that.
You just send the whole PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can absolutely.
Could I put my name on it and take it on the road?
Do we get a cut? What you have?
You and I.
Let's talk about it here.
We can work something out. Stay after for
stay after for Are there any other questions, you guys? Just.
Well, can I be a contrarian for a minute?
Sure, of
Do you
course.
ever turn the critical gaze in onto the premise? And I haven't seen the Kilborn stuff. I'll check it out later. But do you ever turn it in on this idea of, what is the analysis? Looking at images of violence and masculinity? That's always been the case. Since there's been men, we've been killing each other,
Yeah.
Those just reflect that truth, in my view.
Yeah.
But, it's circular. Do you ever turn it in and look at, do you have students who don't drink this Kool-Aid?
Yes, definitely, absolutely. We have students who are very, very unwilling to recognize or even consider the fact that these texts might have any kind of underlying meaning. They're like, it's just an ad. That's all it is. It's just selling something. So we talk a little bit about the psychology of color. And I talked about the example from American Idol where we actually look how colors can manipulate, what you're thinking and that kind of thing. And once I talk to them a little bit more about that, they change. But that's why I say going into it, I'm not telling you to buy his argument. I'm saying just be open-minded. At least consider, do you actually see these things? And I think to us it seems obvious, like we've always seen violence in the media, but I think a lot of my students, at least in my experience, have not considered how it might affect them. Like I'm watching these films and I'm watching these shows, but it doesn't affect me, right? They sort of have that perspective. And I've had some students have this, these aha moments where if one student said, I never really thought about it, but I grew up in New York City, and she was like, I've always had a really negative body image. She said, I don't think of myself as pretty, but I saw ads all the time. And she started talking about the different places she saw ads, like walking down the street, sitting on the subway. She said they're everywhere. And she was like, here it's different. We don't have as many ads, but growing up in New York City, everywhere you turn there's an ad. She said, I think that had a big impact on me. So it was interesting to see them, start connecting. And at the end of the first day, I'll say, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you actually see this happening? Do you think it's completely focused? So I I like to open it up for them to insert their opinion because they're usually very opinionated about this because it's pretty taboo to talk about. So.
You know,